Hey y'all, welcome back. I got Mark here with us again today, and we just finished a couple weeks ago a series in Song of Solomon, and we just started a couple weeks ago a series in the book of Esther. And Esther, as I've talked about, I've just kind of joked about it in my Sunday school. It seemed like there were 52 stories that we always talked about as kids, and we just kind of talked about them every year. Was it like that for you?
Oh, for sure.
So there's just certain Bible stories that get drilled in. Do you remember Esther as a story growing up as a kid?
Not as much. I mean, I remember, for such a time as this, may have been some kind of song we sang about that.
Do you have any of those lyrics?
I mean, I can do something real quick.
Go ahead,
here.
real quick. Okay, never mind. So anyway, so Esther was one of these stories that I remember several times hearing it, and there were certain things about it that were just confusing, and then they did make a VeggieTales video about it, and so every version of the story, even the One Night with the King, which I thought was probably better and more accurate with those, every attempt to tell that story, and it's not just the Esther story really, all the Bible stories, it seems like we just try to clean them up a little bit. Why do you think we do that? Not we, but we.
Why is it that way?
Yeah.
I think we do the same thing with all the Bible stories that we do with the gospel. We always like to tell the good side of the story, and it just makes everybody feel hunky-dory and happy, and it's like, this is what it is. Jesus loves you, and it's all, without really talking about the desperate need, the brokenness, the ugly, icky parts of the story that require redemption.
Right.
We just focus on the redemption part, and because we're afraid that will make God look broken, I think.
Yeah, so the story of Esther then is when good people who love God do the right thing, everything works out great. And there's no telling of just how really ugly that story is. I mean, I was talking about it with our small group, and I felt like I had done a good job of just kind of really being real about the story. And a lady in our small group, she's like, I was reading up on Esther, and it's like, essentially, Xerxes raped her. And I was like, rape? I'm like, yeah. I mean, you can call it One Night with the King all you want to. It's like, you say, it wasn't quite like that. It's like, if you can't say no,
yeah, what is it?
What is it? What else is it? And to think about all of that, it honestly, especially with this story, and there's some other ones too, the more layers and the more you think about it, the worse that, at least that opening part of that story is. And I think we've done, you kicked it off, you did a great job, and I talked about it some more on Sunday. We obviously are taking a different approach. Why do you think our approach to kind of really kind of being more honest about the darker sides of these Bible stories, why do you think that's important?
Well, I mean, that attempt to try to clean things up and make the world and God look like there's that the Bible's always telling a happy story, just doesn't play in real life.
Right.
And our Bible does. So when you try to sanitize it, what happens is you got a book that doesn't have any application for us, or we get confused and frustrated by when our life hits the gutter and we're in the shadows and things are tough, then we've been presented a God in a Bible that doesn't have answers for those kind of situations.
Right.
So you just risk telling half the story.
Right. I'll never be as good as Paul, I'll never be as good as Moses, I'll never be as good as David, when in all fact all three of them were murderers.
Right.
And it's like, if Moses is not someone I can relate to, David isn't someone I can relate to, Paul isn't someone I can relate to, because David killed Goliath, and Paul was bold with the gospel, and Moses stood across the Red Sea. But man, Moses got so angry at the people that God was calling him to lead, and essentially at God himself, that he just hit a rock in anger. I'm so mad, I'm just going to hit this rock with a stick. I mean, that's a relatable story. I have been so angry I've hit a rock with a stick. But you ever been?
Oh, I've definitely hit some rocks with some sticks.
And David made some terrible decisions. And And again, Paul is at a minimum was an accessory to a murder of the very first Christian martyr post Jesus. I mean, these are people that we can relate to. So what do you say to somebody who just still kind of has this attitude as they're kind of looking at the Bible and they're like, this really isn't for me. This is talking about things I don't understand. This is talking about people that I can't relate to. What advice would you give them to kind of, as they try to approach the Bible and the stories that are in there?
Usually this has been my history. My reading has been really, really quick and kind of the high points. And you've used this a lot, talking about just kind of churchy words and they're real flowery. I mean, a lot of times I just kind of read it and don't really dive in and think more deeply about it. And it just seems like any time that I've stopped and just forced myself to put on the glasses of what's kind of erase what I've heard in those 52 Bible stories or what I heard on VeggieTales or what, kind of that scene and forget what anybody else has said about it and just try to take each one of those sections of the story and think about it, then I just start to see things. God really reveals a lot of times applications that I've never thought of before from that. So that's happening with Esther. That happened with Song of Solomon. It seems like every time we walk through a book, I just personally find such depth in the kind of the side story, or the back part of the story that I've never really thought deeply about before.
And you helped me in that first week when you were talking about that God had given, was it in Zechariah where God had given the command it was time for them to come back and they didn't. And then we started talking about that, and then I was looking into, why didn't Mordecai give Haman honor? It didn't seem like it's religious reasons. And then suddenly, the secondary hero in the story, Mordecai, he's not just a hero. He still is. I mean, he is the thing that he did for to the assassination plot. I mean, he seems to be giving really good advice to Esther. He was the catalyst to help Esther do the thing that she needed to do. He obviously raised Esther, even though, she was an orphan. I mean, he did a lot of good things, but he's not just the hero in that story. I mean, and that helps me. These are real people. I mean, the only things that are unrelatable about the people in the Bible are they lived somewhere maybe we'll never go and lived in a time that we don't understand. But the people themselves are incredibly relatable. And so then the story isn't like with Esther, when good people do good things, God blesses you. It's when real people find themselves in really difficult, hard to imagine circumstances, God is always present. I got that.
That works.
Yeah? So is it okay then though? I mean, so we've got a couple of more weeks. We're about to get into the good parts of the story. I mean, so what's next? I mean, how do we teach that? So we spent these last couple of weeks talking about how bad the story is, and now we're kind of moving into the thing that can be a little more VeggieTaleized. Is that a word?
You just made it one.
Yeah. So where do we go from here?
Again, I mean, the gospel becomes beautiful and wonderful, and Jesus becomes my everything if I understand the backstory of how broken I am and how desperately I need Him and how holy He is. And it feels like the more you understand the backside of this story and the ugly part, then you get to, anthem this beautiful part of the story so much the more, that you've got this girl in all of those circumstances that takes this stand and does this thing, and it just brings so much more attention to it than it ever could have if it was just all roses.
Yeah. Good news becomes better and better the more you understand bad news. I mean, like if I took a life preserver right now and just threw it at you, I mean, like, now you've got a life preserver, but you're standing here in the middle of a room in a house nowhere near water. It's like, thanks.
Yeah. And
it's like, and the moral of that story is, Mark, God will always give you a life preserver. Like that.
Thanks, man.
Thanks.
Appreciate that.
But when you're drowning and all hope is lost, and someone throws you a life preserver, that's a different deal. I think that's what you're saying, and I think that's the beauty of this story and just countless other stories is that, man, the news was really bad, and then God showed up in a big way. Mm-hmm. And I've asked myself, the more and more I've studied the Old Testament, why would God put some of these stories in there? I mean, these are gross people that we just then turn to kind of canonize in some way. And I think this is why I'm gonna put the worst stories in there, so that whatever's going on in your story, by comparison, you can know that God will definitely show up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one more thought. I think that maybe that's one thing that we do with some of those stories, is that we like to look at the character and make them more than they actually are, mm-hmm. and just miss the point that God is the hero of the story.
Right.
So like with Esther, even though he's not specifically mentioned, it's this beautiful, like he's there, he's present, he's doing these things. But if we just make the whole story about Esther only, then we miss that God's the hero, and we do that a lot. We like to. And if we're lifting that person up, then we can't show any of their weaknesses. We can't show any of their, because then, that would make them not all that great.
That's cool.
But that's just not relatable.
Yeah, I've enjoyed this. I'm going to enjoy finishing out too. Hey, thank y'all for tuning in with us, and we'll talk to you real soon. You guys take care.